Hey guys, Ren here again with more Pokemon, back with part 3, going over a history of Pokemon. Anyways, let's get started. 2002. Starting off Generation 3, on November the 21st, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire debuts in Japan. Players get to explore the Hoenn region and discover awesome new Pokemon, which was released for the Game Boy Advance. 2003. On the 18th of March, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire comes to the US. These two games are the first core series games where the name of the rival can't be chosen by the player. The fifth movie, Pokemon Heroes Latios and Latias, premieres on May 16th in the US. 2 weeks later, on May 30th, Pokemon Box Ruby and Sapphire is released in Japan. June 18th, a brand new Pokemon trading card expansion is released in the US called EX Ruby and Sapphire set, where they introduce Pokemon EX. 1 month later, on July 18th, Pokemon Channel is released in Japan. This game was released on the Nintendo GameCube, offering a mix of interactive and animated features. August 25th, Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire is released for the Game Boy Advance in the US. 13th of September, Pokemon returns with the 6th season of Pokemon the Animation, called Pokemon Advance. 4 days later, on the 17th of September, a Pokemon trading card game EX Sandstorm set is released in the US. This expansion introduced Pokemon that had a weakness or resistant to more than one type. November the 21st, Pokemon Colosseum is released in Japan. 3 days later, on November the 24th, another Pokemon trading card game expansion is released in the US, called EX Dragon Set. This was the first set to feature cards with colorless as a weakness or resistance. 1st of December, Pokemon Channel comes to the US, released for the Nintendo GameCube. 2004. To start the year, the remakes of Pokemon Red and Green are released in Japan, called Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. March 15th, another expansion is released for the Pokemon trading card game called EX Team Magma vs Team Aqua, which introduced dual-type Pokemon. 1 week later, on March 22nd, Pokemon Colosseum debuts in the US, being released on the Nintendo GameCube. June 1st, another movie is released in the US called Pokemon Jirachi Wishmaker, which featured the legendary Pokemon Jirachi. A few days later, on the 14th of June, EX Hidden Legends set is released for the Pokemon trading card game in the US. Pokemon Box Ruby and Sapphire is released on July 12th in the US. This game allows you to play Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire on your TV. August 30th, another Pokemon trading card game expansion is released in the US called EX Fire Red and Leaf Green set. This set focused on Pokemon from the Kanto region. After the release of this expansion, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green was released in the US on the 7th of September. September 11th, another season premieres on TV for the Pokemon anime, called Pokemon Advance Challenge. This is the 7th season. 5 days later, on the 16th of September, Pokemon Emerald was released in Japan. This game allowed players to visit a new feature called Battle Frontier, a whole new level of competition. November 8th, the Pokemon trading card game expansion EX Team Rocket Return set is released in the US. Dash and Fun comes to kids in Japan. Pokemon Dash is released on December the 2nd. This was the first Pokemon game to be released on the Nintendo DS. 2005. To start the new year, another Pokemon movie premieres in the US on Kids WB on the 22nd of January, called Pokemon Destiny Deoxys. This was the 7th Pokemon movie. Following the Deoxys movie, on February 14th, the EX Deoxys set is released for the Pokemon trading card game in the US. A month later, on the 13th of March, the racing Pokemon game is released for the Nintendo DS in the US, called Pokemon Dash. This game featured the first Generation 4 Pokemon, featuring Munchlax. Pokemon Emerald was released for the Game Boy Advance on May 1st in the US. Following the release of Emerald, the Pokemon trading card expansion is released in the US, called EX Emerald set on May 9th. August 4th, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness is released in Japan for the Nintendo GameCube. In the same month, on August 22nd, another Pokemon trading card expansion is released in the US, called EX Unseen Forces set. This set focused on Generation 2 Pokemon from Pokemon Gold and Silver. The 8th season premieres on TV in the US on September 17th, called Pokemon Advanced Battle. Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness is released for the US for the Nintendo GameCube on October 3rd. This was the last Pokemon game to be released on the Nintendo GameCube. Another game was released in the same month on October 20th called Pokemon Troze in Japan. This was the first Pokemon puzzle game for the Nintendo DS. One more Pokemon related content was released this month. On October 31st, EX Delta Species set is released for the Pokemon trading card game in the US. This set introduced Delta Species Pokemon, plus Holland Pokemon that could be used for energy cards. November 17th, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team are both released in Japan. 2006. February 13th, the Pokemon Trading Card expansion EX Legend Maker set is released in the US. A month later, Pokemon Trade is released in the US for the Nintendo DS on March 6th. This game was released in Europe with the name Pokemon Link on May 5th. A few weeks later, on March 23rd, another game is released for Nintendo DS in Japan, called Pokemon Ranger. This game introduced a whole new way to capture Pokemon. More Pokemon Trading Card expansions were released in the US, one being EX Holland set being released on May 3rd. This set introduced Star Delta species Pokemon. The second being EX Crystal Guardian set being released on August 30th. In this set they introduced EX Delta species Pokemon. September 8th, Pokemon Battle Frontier, the 9th season of Pokemon the Anime, premieres on Cartoon Network in the US. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Blue Rescue Team and Red Rescue Team are both released in the US on September 18th. The 8th Pokemon movie premieres on September 19th in the US called Pokemon Lucario and the Mystery of Moon. This was the first Pokemon movie so far that didn't have legendary Pokemon as the main featured Pokemon. Pokemon Ranger is released for the Nintendo DS on October 30th in the US. This game allowed you to obtain a Generation 4 Pokemon, Manphy, despite being in Generation 3 side series. November 8th, another expansion is released in the US for the Pokemon Trading Card game, which was called EX Dragon Frontier set. 2007. The final expansion of the EX series is released on February 14th in the US for the Pokemon Trading Card game, called EX Power Keeper set. Pokemon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea. The 9th movie premieres in the US on March 23rd. Bonus! Let's give you a bonus. In 2006, it marked the 10-year anniversary of Pokemon. A weekly 24-city tour from February 25th to July 22nd was held called Journey Across America, where Pokemon fans across the country participated in various activities. That's all for this week. Make sure to hit that like button if you liked the video and subscribe for more to come.